Welcome to the special live edition of Truth Jihad Radio. I'm Kevin Barrett, doing the Truth Jihad thing every Friday night live here on Revolution Radio, the best listener-supported network out there. Tonight we're going to be going where few radio shows ever dare to go, which is into the question of, is Islam reasonable? I suppose there are a few shows out there that might take up that question from an unreasonable perspective. In fact, if you were driving across the country, you could twiddle your dial and get a nominally Christian station telling you amazing things about Islamic craziness. There are 500 plus Christian stations in the United States, and they're all putting out I don't know. Some of them have some good stuff. We have one here in southwestern Wisconsin that I sort of enjoy for its classical music. But the problem is a lot of these Christian stations are hating on Islam all the time with all sorts of misinformation. So 500 Christian stations, 0 Muslim stations. There's one Muslim radio show out of Chicago, but no actual stations. That's ridiculous. So we're going to try to fix that. I am working on a project to get Radio Free Islam up and running. Eventually, it would be great to get that operating on the actual airwaves. In any case, so we're going to talk a little more sophisticatedly, if that's a sophisticated word to use, about religion. One of those topics you're just never supposed to discuss at your mother's dinner table, along with 9/11 truth and Zionism and a lot of other things that we love to talk about here on Truth Jihad Radio. All right. Well, the guests tonight are Nadeem, Haque, and Zeshan Shahbaz. You know, I wrote an article for a book edited by Richard Curtis, and this was it's called Reasonable Religion. And in my contribution, I took issue with then Pope Benedict's claim that Islam was unreasonable. He used this literally Byzantine reference and Byzantine logic, as it were, to try to claim that Islam was unreasonable because it didn't get into the logos the way the Byzantine Christians did. It was all. So I deconstructed the Pope's argument. I proved that the Pope is not infallible because I won an argument with him. But my larger point in that article was that the over insistence on human reason, or one's own particular idea of human reason, which is kind of what the Pope was doing, can be unreasonable. It can be unreasonable to say that everything is reason. Don't you think?
I think we have to maybe define reason, and the way I would define reason is that this universe is based on cause and effect, and so there's motion in this universe. There are particles, there are things that are moving, and they have positions. So and something exists or does not exist. So if you have this knowledge of whether something exists or doesn't exist and how cause and effect occur, then, and you connect that, your thinking matches that, then you are understanding reality. But if you don't do it in the right way, then you're not gonna see the reality, right? You're gonna misinterpret things. So the idea of reason in the Quran is as you know, comes from ikal, the root word akal, which means to connect things, to
bind. Yeah, that's why it's the same word when you say the prophet, peace upon him, said tawakkul wa ta'aqqul, meaning sometimes translated as trust in God but tie your camel, or trust in God but use your reason. That aql, the root there, means to tie or to bind things together, whether it's your camel's legs so he can't wander off into the desert while you're sleeping at night, or whether it's to bind things together in these structures of logic and reason.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum, Kevin. This is Zeshan.
Alaikum assalam, Zeshan. Good to have you back. How have you been?
Yeah, just to add to this conversation, as Nadeem had mentioned, it's based on reason is based on our understanding of cause and effect relationships, because our universe is based on cause and effect from what we discern. So, I mean, just to give more of a basic example is like, say, if someone is standing in the middle of a road and he sees a car fast approaching him, if that man is if he was apt to using his reason, he would move away from the car, because the man reasons that If he doesn't move away, the car will strike him, which is the cause, and he'll probably be killed or injured, which is the effect. So, kind of lame terms, that's what reason is. And we actually, human beings, we all use reason, but I think the problem occurs when we neglect to use reason when we need it most, right? So,
well, let me throw in a counterexample. Could it be possible, though, that there are some cases where it works the other way around? Okay, and two quick references here, Robert Pirsig and Shakespeare. With Robert Pirsig in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance says that you touch a hot stove and you leap away from it and you know it's bad. That is, the values are there before you even think about it, before there's any possible use of reason. And then with Shakespeare's Hamlet, we have Hamlet sort of, in a sense, the values of the situation, that the evil father-in-law king has killed his father, the true king. But Hamlet just sits there reasoning and thinking. He's overthinking things, and he should have just gone and killed the king and set things right. But no, he's using his reason too much. So is it possible that one can err in that direction too?
Yeah, sure. I think that the way I'm right now looking at reason is, like in terms of trying to understand what reality is. So if I knew that, that the temperature is going to harm me if I touch something that's hot, then I won't touch it, right? So even kids, they experience that, right? They learn through experience. But reasoning, so a lot of people, I agree, just, reason things, something may be internally consistent, but it may not be externally consistent, in the sense that you may have a statement which is just consistent within itself, but doesn't correspond with reality. So that's nonsense, right? That could be nonsense. So it has to also correspond with reality, the external reality. And when you have that, then you have you're moving towards the truth. So because you could have a dictionary that is consistent within itself, but doesn't really explain the reality outside. Do you know what I'm saying? So reasoning, as far as coming to the truth, has to do with proper interconnection between things, and I think that's what Islam is talking about, and the Quran is talking about, basically. And that's the foundation of Islam. That is the foundation of Islam. Because remember, there's a verse that says, "If only we had listened or used our reason, we would not be companions of the fire." So it's a salvation verse in the Quran. It's saying that your salvation is to use your reason, because if you don't, you'll end up in trouble. Basically, that's what the Quran's saying. It's very straightforward.
And it seems the Quran insists on reason, maybe more than other scriptures, as far as I can tell. But the Quran also says that other scriptures and revelations are legitimate. That is, that God has sent divine messages to thousands of prophets from thousands of different traditions. So how do you reconcile those things? That first, the Islamic revelation seems to insist on reason more strongly than most of what we see in comparative religion. And then secondly, that the Islamic revelation also holds that other revelations are legitimate.
Yeah, the thing is that we don't have the originals of what these prophets reveal, right? The Quran is the original. So with, for example, Jesus, the Injil was revealed to him, but we don't have the original. So the original would have had, the same emphasis on reason, because, the principles don't change, and it would have had that. But you do see remnants of, rationality in the existing belief systems. And indeed, all prophets came to talk about reality, which is the existence of God and submitting to Him. So all of them came to talk about Islam, which means submission to the Creator, and it means peace. So, but the idea of the concept of reason, it's rooted in this. There's a word called iman, as you know, and the root is amana, and amana means to confirm things. And so let me give you an example. If you're in a dangerous neighborhood and you're not sure whether the door is locked or not, you're going to go and check it and verify it, right? So that's the meaning of the root meaning of iman, amana, to verify and check. At the same time, once you've checked it, you feel secure. So the word amana also means security. And if you feel secure, you feel at peace. And that's how that word connects with the word Islam. See, there's a connection through that. That if you use your reason, you feel secure, you'll be at peace. So that's how these words are interconnected. So that you can see it's a very foundational thing for Islam and a true belief system.
Well, at the very beginning of the second surah in Quran, we hear that this is a revelation in which there is no doubt for those who believe, who amana, who have iman, or have faith or heart knowledge or security, as you're saying, in al-ghaib, which is the unseen, the world of the unseen, and that's sometimes interpreted as meaning that we should have kind of blind faith in what we can't see. But there are other interpretations of that we should have heart knowledge, which is another translation of this iman or amana, a kind of secure heart knowledge that there is all this stuff that we can't see that's beyond our vision. But in some sense, we do have knowledge of it. We have faith is one translation, but faith is not an adequate translation. So it seems to me that verse it's not telling us to have blind faith without reason. It's telling us to accept that there is so much that we can't see, so much that we can't know, but to encompass it a little bit in our hearts with a special kind of knowledge that I think has as much to do with intuition as with what's usually considered reason.
Yes, I agree with you, but look at the proper translation. And so if I was translating the Quran, then I would kind of translate it, especially using root meaning. So, for example, look at the meaning; it changes completely. It says, that these people have confirmed the existence of that which you can't see, or the unseen. And it's not illogical to believe in that which is unseen, in the sense that if the Creator made the universe, the Creator can't be anything like the universe. It doesn't make sense. So of course he'd be unseen, right? If the Creator was like the universe, he'd be part of the universe. Then who made the universe? So it's saying, and you don't have to see something to believe in it in that sense. There are effects, right? You don't see, for example, carbon monoxide, but you may see the effects of a dead person because he left the engine running or something. So you see things by the effects, and the effect of this intelligence is the universe. So that's what this verse is saying. But I agree with you. I think a lot of the Muslim world, and this is the root problem in the Muslim world, have taken it the other way, that you have to just have blind faith. It's true, they use that passage to say that's blind. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because when we talk about Islam and reason, in this book, God and Logic in Islam, The Caliphate of Reason by John Walbridge, which I highly recommend, is published by Cambridge University Press. It came out in 2011. It makes it clear. It's a very nice, succinct summary of the history of logic and reason in Islam, which had a scholastic tradition for most of its history. And it's in recent years and in recent modern times, there's been a Salafi movement that said throw out the entire scholastic tradition and go back to sort of an acceptance of the original revelation and focus on the beginning of things and throw out the use of reason and logic in the scholastic tradition that developed over the centuries. Some people blame that for the unreasonable behavior that we see all the time in our media, accounts of Muslims engaging in wildly unreasonable behavior, nominal Muslims at least. We see pictures of heads being chopped off for no reason and all kinds of bizarre, the whole war on terror that I'm reporting on all the time is the whole thing is ludicrous. I mean, if you really believed that these 19, guys with box cutters actually did pull off 9/11, and of course we know that they didn't, but if they had, they would have been the world's stupidest geniuses, because they would have had to be geniuses to pull it off, and they would have had to be complete idiots to want to, because strategically, giving this U.S. this Pearl Harbor to go out and smash the Muslims and murder 32 million Muslims and destroy all the Middle Eastern countries was the last thing that any Muslim radical would ever want. And so you would, and we see these Salafi jihadi types constantly working against the interest of Islam. We have to ask to what extent that's because somehow they've lost their reason, or to what extent it's because that this is all being orchestrated by people using strategic reason on the other side, that is, enemies of Islam.
So I think that when the Muslims were using reasoning, then they established the house of wisdom. I mean, so the society was at quite a high level. Maybe not at the highest level because they'd gone away from the rightfully guided, caliphs, the right political system. But nonetheless, it was still very at a high level. But I think that what started happening is that there were many internal forces that tried to, bring in this idea of non-reason, or I would say mysticism. And there were, I think, many organizations connected with that. One of them was the Ismaili organization, who tried to bring in this idea of mixing it with, mysticism from Buddhism and Christianity and all that. So I think that really led to the kind of the slow downfall of the Muslims. And then, of course, you had the invasion, the Mongol invasion in 1258. That compounded the problem. I think that Al-Ghazali's emphasis on, he wasn't focusing on reason, according to what some people say. Other people say that his writings have been distorted. That's not what he was saying. So, but anyway, I think that this affected the Muslims negatively, and Muslim civilization started to go into a decline. But it was still declining from a high level.
Well, let's mention Ghazali and his fight with the philosophers who basically were relying more on reason, whereas Ghazali was relying on revelation, including mystical intuition or mystical revelation. If we look at actually what Ghazali was refuting, he was refuting ideas of the philosophers, such as the philosophers said that there could not possibly be a beginning to existence in time. That is, the whole universe must be eternal. And Ghazali, relying on his on revelation, said no, there must be a beginning in time. And today we look back at this and we say, well, these philosophers who were using reason to prove that the world had to be eternal and there could not have been a beginning were wrong, because we know about the Big Bang Theory. And Ghazali, who was not relying on reason, he was relying on revelation, was right. Now, isn't that an example of how reason cannot necessarily get to the correct answer sometimes?
Well, I think that it's the improper use of reason, because, if you use reason, then you can show that the universe must have had a beginning from the use of reasoning itself. You don't even have to use the Big Bang, but there's an argument that shows that the universe must have had a beginning. But I think he was maybe even attacking this cause and effect, the idea of cause and effect, whereas Ibn Rushd was saying that there has to be cause and effect. So really, when you analyze it, Allah is, He has created cause and effect, yet He's also above cause and effect. So really, both of them were right in a way, because if this universe is the imagination or creation of God, then there's vertical control and there's also cause and effect, right? So do you know what I mean? There's no dichotomy. So
But can reason just by itself? It depends how we define reason. And here Walbridge tells us that reason or rationality is the systematic and controlling use of beliefs, arguments, or actions based on well-grounded premises and valid arguments, such that another person who has access to the same information can understand the argument correctly, ought to agree that the premises are well-grounded, the logic is sound, and the resultant beliefs, arguments, or actions are correct. So ultimately, it rests on that agreement or consensus. But later in his book, Walbridge contradicts himself and says we must not imagine that a commitment to reason guarantees agreement. Again, it's hard to say why. Okay, you say that reason says that we should have a beginning to creation, but all the philosophers, the school of the philosophers in the time of Ghazali and Ibn Rushd, had the opposite view. They all believed that reason proved that the world had to be eternal. So if reason depends, the whole definition of reason depends on a kind of consensus, everybody agreeing, and we don't have that consensus, where does that leave us?
No, you see, Kevin, I believe it's like 1 plus 1 is 2. I think that I have to analyze why they were saying it was eternal, because I'm sure there's a flaw somewhere. Because, it's very easy to show that the universe had a beginning. I've done that elsewhere in some of my writings and the writings of my colleague, Muhammad Muslim. So, and I think you know some of the arguments too about, you know, why the universe must have an origin point. But then, of course, we have evidence from the Big Bang too, you know, and, you know,
and also I want to add, from what I know, I believe Al-Ghazali wasn't attacking all philosophers. He was actually, his book, Incoherence of the Philosophers, actually, he was attacking certain philosophers, right? He was not attacking all the philosophers. He was attacking all those philosophers who had that argument that the universe is eternal. It has no beginning, right?
Well, he was cherry picking a little bit, I think.
Was what?
I think he was cherry picking. He was looking through the various philosophers and kind of cherry picking things that he could create his argument against. And of course, he was using reason to do it.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, on this point, I don't know his exact argument. Perhaps he used the same argument that Nadeem used on where the universe by logic must have a beginning. And if he was using that argument, he's correct. And he's rational there, right? I think, and you will probably know about Ibn Rushd's rebuttal incoherence of the incoherence that he wrote.
Yes.
And again, from what I know in that book, Ibn Rushd is not even defending the philosophers that Al-Ghazali attacked, right? It was just more for clarification on where he stood and where Al-Ghazali was, where he thought he was incorrect. I think what Ibn Rushd had probably a problem with was on downplaying the ability of reason to discover truths, and I think that's what he had a problem with when it came to Al-Ghazali, and it's interesting, you know, Ibn Rushd, you know, simply, like, he defined reason, right? He said reason and logic implies the existence of causes and effects. And knowledge of these effects can only be rendered perfect through knowledge of their causes. Denial of cause implies a denial of knowledge, and denial of knowledge implies that nothing in this world can be really known. So, which he's kind of correct, because if we downplay the ability of reason to discover truth, then there's no such thing as knowledge then, because knowledge is based on understanding of cause and effect of things.
Yeah.
Right.
Then okay. So I just want to move on to the political aspects of, you see, because this whole thing is very political. Because if the prophets came here to tell everybody to use reason, and they were empowering everybody, and that poses a problem for authority, right? Because if there's some elites in society, and that happens all over throughout centuries, the century, even now, then they don't want you to use reason because they don't want to give up what they have, right? So therefore they try and make the situation such that very difficult for people who are, you know, want to use reason and, you know, logic and proof, because it destroys their power structure. And so it's always been a battle between the prophets who are emphasizing reason and evidence and proof, which are things that the Quran demands, and this this quest for control. And so what we see happening now even is that, you know, they will not encourage for example, so-called Western countries. I can talk about Eastern and Eastern powers, you know, the usage of reason within the Muslim world, because they know that if they do, then all the Muslims will become one and united. And if you become one and united, then who's going to exploit them, right? For oil or whatever, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, the only reasonable position for a Muslim today is to insist on the unity of the Muslim Ummah. And were we all to do that, and behave reasonably in an effort to make that come to fruition, the world, and especially the existence of many of the Muslims in parts of the world that are horribly exploited today, would be much better.
Yeah, because in the Quran it says, hold fast to the rope of Allah and do not separate yourself, you know, be divided among yourselves. Holding fast to the rope of Allah is actually talking about the Quran and the truth. So it wants all of us to hold fast to it, which means to understand it, you know, and once we all understand it, then we'll be united, right? But to understand it, you need to use your reason. Because remember, in the Quran it says, we have shown you the signs, but only those who use reason will understand it, right? Doesn't it keep saying that in the Quran? We have shown the signs, but only those who use reason will understand it. So what is it saying? It's saying that these signs will not be understood unless you use reason. So those who do not use reason, they're not signs for them, because they're not going to accept them. How many times have you proven things to people from the Quran? And how many times have they said, oh, we don't believe in it, you know? Because it's the desires, right? So that's the other point. It's when your desires come in between you and what you want to achieve, then, you know, it becomes a problem, right? Then you don't use your reason. So
well,
that's what the
that's a
Quran.
good point. That in a way we can understand what reason is in some ways better by a kind of a negative definition. In the same way, there's a negative theology that God is not an actual being. God is the source of all being. God is not this. God is not that. Likewise, with reason, we recognize what it is when we see it. We see the opposite. We see authoritarianism. We see self-interested, egotistical authoritarians imposing their will on people and forcing them to obey without thinking, without using their reason. And we see it when people behave emotionally and so on.
Exactly. And how many people, these even so-called superstar speakers, I'm not going to mention any, but talk about reason. Be they the puppets of Western governments, or be they on their own, And how many people in academia, the professors, emphasize reason? They don't. And I've had problems because I've sent, well, for example, I sent an article that emphasized reason. Actually, it's the one on animal rights, and it got rejected because one of the referees, who's a Muslim, said, there's too much kind of emphasis on reasoning and all that. Which is ridiculous, right? Because and then
how can you referee a paper and say there's too much emphasis on reason? That doesn't make any sense.
So yeah, and then they said that my paper was essentialist and all this, nonsense, academic jargon. Either something is true or not. What is this thing about essentialism? I'm into essentialism. Either it's true or not true. You see, this is the problem with our so-called Muslim academia, right? That's one problem. So unless, we start to really, like even in khutbahs, I hardly ever hear, anybody talking about reason. So it's a kind of a problem in the Muslim world, right? Unless the Muslims get their act together, we can keep blaming the, imperialist powers and all that, but unless we get our act together, really, we're not going to come out the better, So,
well, that's an interesting example you give of the referee of the paper who happened to be Muslim, actually, saying that this is essentialist, which is this. There's a lot of this kind of academic groupthink these days, political correctness, and various forms of what I would argue are unreason. That is, these almost substitute religions that are all based on faith with not so much content of reason. And we see this pervading the academy, and I think it's partly there to deflect people from using their reason to correctly analyze the way power is actually operating. Because if they use their reason correctly and understood how power is operating, they would then be in a position to use their reasons to try to fix it and make their own lives better, make other people's lives better, and that would disempower the oppressive groups that are, deceiving us and ruling through raw, brute power and pure obedience and emotional, subliminal propaganda. Everything but reason.
Yeah, exactly. And as when in high school or in even what is it called, in junior high or whatever. Imagine if they had a course called fallacies of logic, and they were teaching that at that age.
I taught logical fallacies in my right. I've taught English composition a few times, including when I got kicked out of the University of Wisconsin. I was teaching Islam there, and they kicked me out for talking about 9/11, which I wasn't doing much in the classroom, by the way. Anyway, so I taught English composition for a couple of years under the radar after that over at Kaplan University in Milwaukee. And when I teach composition, I always try to go through the logical fallacies, because that's it's a really useful way of helping people learn critical thinking. Again, it's almost easier to see what reason is by showing people what it isn't.
Exactly, but I'm saying, imagine if that was taught at high school or the lower grades, and people would be questioning everything, right? I mean, even the 9/11 stuff that is your main subject, they'd be questioning that. Like, how can something fall at free fall speed? It doesn't make sense, right? So, I mean, this whole thing, because our educational system is actually, to a large extent, a miseducational system, right? They just want you to be smart enough to, be their produce, basically, but not really reform society. So,
and the media does that too, of course. The media wants you to be smart enough to kind of parrot their talking points, but not smart enough to see through them.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Yeah, I just want to mention that how the usage of reason is connected to compassion, right? Because if one rationally is certain of a creator, then you realize the creator is compassionate in terms of what he's provided you and rest of creation, right? And that's what all the prophet and the early the successors practice. For example, as you know, Umar ibn al-Khattab, you probably know this, known as one of the best khalifas in history. He said that the foundation of man is his intellect or reason, right? And it's quite interesting. I wanted to mention that how reason is connected to our level of iman. So, as you may know, during the Abbasid Caliphate, a lot of the Khalifas at that time were kind of followers of the school of thought of the people of unity and justice, which is the proper name. They're referred to as the Mu'tazilites, and which I say is a derogatory term that's been coined. But there was a caliph by the name of Al-Mu'tasim, and what happened was he was alerted that there was this woman who was captured by the Romans. She wasn't assaulted or abused. She was just put in jail. So Al-Mu'tasim, again, who was a follower of the people of unity and justice, that school of thought that highlights the importance of reason. Him, along with an army, went to that Roman city and rescued her, right? Just that one woman. Now, look at the state of our situation right now. There's there have been women who've been, brutally raped, and, what's happening in Burma, etc., with the genocide in Bosnia and the rape there. And, you can see what's, lack of any action from the Ummah, right? And it's connected to our certitude in Islam and in the Creator. You can comment on that, Kevin, if you like.
Well, I wonder about the Mu'tazila. I know you guys are kind of neo-Mu'tazilites in a way, and I think there's definitely something to be said for that. But
no. For example,
no? Okay. I don't want to pin labels on you.
No. We're not new Mu'tazilites. The only reason I mentioned that was is because they're known in history to kind of highlight the importance of reason. I'm not saying that the other caliphs, they actually did. They all did, and that's what brought about the great welfare system of the caliphate system in history. So don't call us the Mu'tazilites. We're not. So.
Okay. Well, that's one reason a lot of people wouldn't want to be called neo-Mu'tazilites is the Mu'tazilites got a bad name for various reasons. I suppose mainly because the opposition won, but what we hear in the histories is that the Mu'tazilites had an inquisition called the Mihna, which was notorious for sort of torturing people because they weren't totally rational. They insisted on being irrational. And so if you're an advocate of reason who is so insistent on reason that you run around torturing people that you consider irrational, I question how reasonable that is.
Yeah. And by the way, we don't have any torture equipment here.
I can feel the thumb screws turning already here. I'm ready to concede the argument to you.
And again, if the leaders of the people of unity and justice did this, they were absolutely wrong. But I'm not sure if this was more of a decision that the caliph made at that time. So I don't know if it was, obviously the blame is put on him, right? Because he's the one who enforced the Inquisition, right?
Yeah, these issues, these intellectual and philosophical and spiritual issues are often actually used by political power. And so a lot of the use of force ends up being done for political reasons. And then the ideas are kind of employed for that. But whether you can really blame the ideas, I don't know. Like, I don't think you can necessarily blame people who are advocates of reason just because some advocate of reason went too far.
Yeah, from by some zealot who was such a fan that he
right.
Reasonable, right?
The other thing is that you see, if it wasn't for the Quran, then society would have just been left in the dark ages. So it's the Quran that made people think and experiment, use inductive reasoning, more than the Greek philosophers who used deductive reasoning. And the experimentalism came about from Ibn al-Haytham, for example, right? And he was the main proponent of that. and he got his knowledge from the Quran. So the Quran really affected Europe, especially through Ibn Rushd. And the followers of Ibn Rushd, they were called the Averroists, and they challenged the church based on the idea of cause and effect, right? The transubstantiation, they said it was illogical. And that actually helped to change Europe and bring about the Renaissance and then the Enlightenment, right? So the Quran has had a direct effect on both the methodology and the details. For example, discoveries as well as the methodology, right? And people don't know about this, and even they were called humanists. Actually, these people who were the followers of Averroes, they were called humanists. So it's interesting that a Muslim philosopher brought about the term humanist. And
we see this cropping up in Western history. There's a fascinating book I've been reading called Islam and the English Enlightenment that goes over what happened 250 years ago or so, 300 years ago in England. Actually got started a little before that, when Islam was used by Unitarians who were horrible heretics back then. I come from a Unitarian family here in the United States. And these Unitarians were advocates of reason, who said that the doctrine of the Trinity is unreasonable. And they were persecuted by the Orthodox Christians. So Islam actually was a kind of a trope that was picked up on by these early Enlightenment people who used the relative rationality of Islam as a club to beat irrational aspects of Christianity over the head with. And this is part of history that we've kind of missed in our dominant narrative here in the West.
Exactly. The philosopher Goethe, Voltaire, they all spoke highly of Islam as being Goethe believed that was the true belief system. And he even wrote, about that. Muhammad's Ghazan, he wrote that. And same with Voltaire. They were, he wrote, he wrote Candide, right? And in there, he's kind of talking about an ideal civilization, which is really an Islamic civilization if you really look at it closely, right? So these guys were really affected by Islam. But what happened was that by the 19th century, the powers that be, whoever you want to call them, whoever they are, okay, we won't get into that right now, but they kind of saw this, and they then had an intense effort of the missionaries, Christian missionaries, and also bringing about atheism to divert this. Because if they hadn't diverted it, then the whole world would have come to Islam. The reason is because, you had people like Thomas Paine and, before that you had Servetus, right, whom they burned at the stake because he believed in one God, right? He didn't believe in the Trinity. So there was definitely a trajectory toward Islam for the whole world, but it got sidetracked. And so we're in the situation of great confusion of atheism, mysticism, and, some fools following Islam, but they're not really following Islam. They're following something very strange, And
when we see a lot of unreasonable behavior among nominal Muslims, and right now the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and to some extent al-Sisi and Egypt on one side, and Iran, Qatar, and Turkey on the other side in the Middle East, strikes me as an example of a case where one side is clearly more reasonable than the other. The Qataris depend on discursive arguments with their Al Jazeera channel for their soft power. And the Turks have developed a kind, they're moving back towards Islam in a relatively reasonable way for the most part, with plenty of exceptions. And Iran is a relatively reasonable modern Islamic society as well. Whereas on the other side, we have General al-Sisi, who overthrew this democratic experiment and massacred thousands in the streets of Egypt, and is giving away Egypt's water and is giving away Egypt's islands to the Israelis by way of the Saudis. And then you have the Saudis, who are about the most unreasonable excuse for Muslims that ever existed. And then you have the Israelis, and I don't even want to start on them. So it looks to me like we have a kind of a clash of relatively reasonable countries on one side and extremely unreasonable ones on the other. And guess which side Trump is on?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is, as Zbigniew Brzezinski, whatever, in 1987, I heard him speak, and he basically scared of the domino effect, that if you really get a true Islamic, country, then there's going to be a domino effect, and it's going to spread, right? So he himself talked about it, and he said that we have to stop this. So, but people have forgotten about what he said, right? So yeah, that's.
Well, there's a lot more to be said, but we're at the end of the first hour, and so thank you so much, Nadeem and Zeshan. It's been a pleasure.